Aloha and welcome to E50. This is the second part of the digits application building task. And for this uh, practice squad, what we're going to do is we're going to create a list contacts page where we display the contacts in the system using this nice card format supplied for us by Semantic UI. Okay, so the first thing is probably want to watch this WOD before trying it so that you get the sense. Don't just stop and pause, but maybe take notes while you watch it. If you see things that aren't listed here that would be useful to you, take some notes while you watch the WOD, and then try to do it with only your notes, not the video playing. You're gonna need to know how to branch and merge in GitHub Desktop, so you should watch that screencast. And there's some Meteor Guide chapters. So the cool thing about this is that when you finish the last WOD, you're probably in a branch, landing page 1. Actually, your branch is probably landing page 2, given that you tried to solve it twice. And so what we want to do is we want to build off what we had last time. And the standard practice when you're using Git-based development is often you have a branch. The master branch is usually the branch which maintains kind of the working version of the system, and then you develop stuff in subsidiary branches that you branch off of master, and when you're done and you have something working, you merge it back into master, and then you continue from there. So that's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to merge landing page 1, which works and has the updates to the landing page, into master. And the way that we do that in GitHub Desktop is super simple. We just go to the master branch, and then we say merge into current branch, and we select our landing page 1, which is what we just finished, and we say merge, and then we say push, so that not only is master branch locally reflecting the results of that work in landing page 1, but also back up at GitHub we have it as well. So now we're back in master branch. And if we go ahead and go to our digits application, what we can see is the master branch now has that updated landing page, okay, just like we want it to. Okay, cool. So we pushed our master branch to GitHub. We start Meteor. I didn't quit Meteor when doing this, and that's actually it's marginally okay for the kinds of things we're doing right now, but it's really much better to quit Meteor before you do any GitHub manipulations. I didn't. It turns out right. In this scenario, it's not going to hurt to not quit Meteor, but as a general rule, always quit Meteor before you do this GitHub stuff. Okay, so let's now go to round 1. So we'll start the timer. And we're going to create a branch called list contacts page 1. Okay, so we're in master. We're going to create a new branch off master called list contacts page 1. Create, and then we'll publish. And then we'll go back and find out what we have to do next. If necessary, start your application using Meteor npm run start, but we look good, so we don't have to do that. Take a look at the console to make sure there's no errors. That's always a good idea. We look, and that is a warning. Hash history cannot push the same path. That I think is just an artifact of having restarted. So I think we're totally fine there. If we just reload the system, we don't get that error. So that's that might have been an error from the fact that we didn't quit GitHub when we did the branch and merge. Okay, so now we'll create a new page for listing all the contacts. So we'll make a copy of list stuff called listcontacts.jsx. So we go to we go find list stuff, and we'll make a copy of it, and then we'll paste it, and we'll call it list contacts.jsx. Is that what they wanted to call it? Yeah. And then we have to rename list stuff to list context. So propeller R, we're in this file buffer. Propeller R, list stuff, list contacts. There's 3 matches. Let's replace all of them. And that looks good. Wait. And remove the code to render the table and change the header text to list contacts. So remove the code. This isn't what we want. Remove the code to render the table and change this header to list contacts. Let's see if this stuff goes away. I save, and then I don't know. Let's just get rid of these errors, because it's always stressful to have. And add inverted to the property as the header, so the header will appear in white rather than black. So header, blah, 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 inverted, did that. Okay, in app.jsx, specify list contacts rather than list stuff as the component to be rendered when the path is list. So we go to app.jsx. Here's the route for list. This should be list contacts. So we can say import list contacts from pages, list contacts, and then we could just delete it like that. That's one way to do it. You could have edited the previous line, just making sure that you did everything correct. Okay, fix the import, and then in navbar, change the link from list stuff to list contacts. So in navbar, change this to list contacts. And then login is say john.foo.com to see your changes. Okay, so remember about the whole login thing. In our config, settings.development.json, we've got these accounts, john@foo.com, passwords change me. That's where those accounts are created. So we go to digits. Actually, in this case, I'm already logged in as john@foo.com, so I won't do that again. But if I go to list contacts, I get this page. Nothing coming out in the console, so I'm happy about that. And it actually looks pretty darn similar to that. Okay, so we're good so far. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create some sample contact data in the list contacts component. So we're going to create a field called contacts that contains a list of contact information objects. And I just gave you the data because, who wants to type all that? So in the list contacts component, go back here, what we'll do is just copy and paste that stuff in there. And then we want to create a card component to hold that data. So remember, we had a single component called stuff item to hold each stuff item. We're going to use that as our kind of base, but we're going to call it, you use that code as our base to make this contact.jsx. So stuff item, we'll propeller C, and then propeller V, and call it contact. And then once we're in here, we want to do a propeller R to replace stuff item with contact. That's going to replace 3 matches, and you can see what they are right here. Those are the ones we want to change. Okay, so now we've got this component called contact. And we're going to use a card component to hold that. But before we get there, we're going to be passed contact as a property. So let's just change this to say that the property that we're being passed in is an object, because it's going to be basically one of these guys here, right? And it's an object, so okay. And then we're going to use the card documentation to render a card that contains a first. Okay, so how does that work? So let's open this link in a new tab. So here we are at card. And, it's not unreasonable to kind of look through these examples and go, well, where's an example that kind of looks nice? When you're started with when you're starting with design, you can use the documentation. That what's so nice about this is they give you a bunch of different, boilerplates. And if you find one you like I kind of like this one, click the try it button, and then you see the code. So the code here is basically a card. And then to make your life even easier, you could do a propeller C and then go back to our system. And so instead of returning a table row, let's return a card. Okay, and obviously card is not defined, so we have to import it. And link is no longer used, so let's get rid of it. And we need an image, so let's make one of those or import that. Okay, and then we start looking at this and go, well, what do we actually want for real here? Well, for our picture, for our image, what we want to do is do this dot props dot contact dot image, right? Because this dot props dot contact refers to this object, and this object is going to be one of these guys, okay? And that has a field called image. So we're going to basically get, an image associated with this. And then for card header, first name, last name, well, we'll just, instead of, this hard-coded first name, last name, let's do this dot props dot contact first name followed by this dot props dot contact dot last name. Okay, and then for the meta field, you can kind of go back to see what these things look like. The meta field is right there. Let's do this dot props dot contact dot address. And then for description, let's just do the description. This dot props dot contact dot description. And then we got these buttons at the bottom, and those we do not need. So we get rid of that. And we end up with something that, we get our green check mark, which is good. So ESLint isn't noticing anything bad. And that looks like, kind of a reasonable looking card. Now we're not displaying it yet, but it seems to have the right structure. It's going to render a card that contains a first name, last name, address, image, and description. Now what we have to do is edit the list context component to actually render these cards. And there's a few steps. The first thing is that you notice there was a card group, okay? And that's a, semantic UI mechanism for when you have a bunch of cards and you want to display them together. You put them in a card group. You can read, more about it here and what the kinds of properties are associated with it. But we're going to create, we're going to edit the list context to render card group. The card group will map through the contacts passing a function that takes two arguments, contact and index, and returns an invocation of the contact component passing two properties, key and contact with the contact. So this is a little complicated to read. It's almost easier to just show you what this means. What this means is that underneath our header, first thing is we're going to have a card group. Oops. Where's my, there it is. And let's import it because who wants to see those red squiggles if we don't have to? Okay. And then inside there, let's get rid of that. What we're going to do is we're going to map through this dot contacts dot map. So this dot contacts, what's that? Well, that's this data structure. This is an array. An array has a map operation defined upon it. And what we're going to do is call map, and we're going to pass it a function. And this is going to be a function that starts off by taking two arguments. So it's a function of two arguments, a contact and an index. And what it's going to return, what it's going to return is an invocation of contact with key equals index and contact equals contact. And then contact equals contact. Yeah. And then we've got to import contact. So we import contact from import contact from imports UI components contact imports UI components contact. Okay. Here's this line here. Okay, so let's look at this again to clarify. We have this array right here called contacts. It's got 3 objects in it. And the goal here is that we're going to map through those. And the map function takes a first argument, which is going to be each element in turn in this collection, in this array. But it also has an optional second argument where the mapping function will pass in an index. So it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, representing which location in the array this particular contact is. That's convenient for us because when you have kind of multiple React elements being rendered right next to each other as kind of siblings, React wants there to be a key property which will establish, which is provided an ID or a unique number so that React can distinguish one from the other when it's trying to re-render using the virtual DOM. Okay, so it's just a kind of a thing that React likes to have, and if we're doing a map, then the index is a convenient way of assigning a unique number to each of these. And then we have a property called contact where we'll pass in the actual, object here. Okay? So what inside this card group, what's going to be rendered is a set of contact React components, one corresponding to each of these objects. Okay? All right, and then inside here, you can see we have this contact property. Key is a kind of implicit property. We don't have to explicitly declare it. Everything will be okay. And we don't even use it. We don't need it. That's just used by React to do this virtual DOM manipulation. All right, so let's see. We've done all that. So when you're done, the list contacts page should look like this. Doggone it. Check the render. We got a mistake here. Warning, type is invalid. Expected a string or a class function, but got undefined. You likely forgot to export. Okay, so looks like we've got someplace. That's okay. Export list contacts. I have a feeling my import contacts. Import UI components. Contacts. Let's see what happens here. Okay, that looks good. So, oh yeah. Okay, so the problem was this was an export default, and it should have been like this. And actually the error message was really good because it told me I likely did an export that I mixed up an export default and export named. So what we can see here is that the I have my contacts listed, but they're not centered very well. And so the last thing we want to do is look at our card um, properties and see that there's a centered property we can add to a card. So let's go ahead and do that. Whoops. So here's our card right here. We'll say centered. And then when we look at digits, now they're spaced out quite nicely. We don't get anything in the console, so we can stop that. And basically, we've got the list contact page looking pretty good, like we want. You can see we can do that. So the last thing we want to do is Control C to stop Meteor. We'll do a Meteor npm run lint to make sure that we don't have any ESLint errors someplace that we can't see using IntelliJ. So that scans all the files. And having done that, we can now go to GitHub Desktop, and we should commit and push our contacts branch with the merge list contacts page mockup finished in 20 minutes. So list contacts page mockup, list contacts page mockup finished in 20 minutes. So we commit to here, push, and we're done, I believe. Yeah. So at this point, I recommend you go ahead and do the WAD a second time so you can run into some other errors. Like I had an error. It took me a couple minutes to figure it out. To do that, just switch back to the master branch in GitHub Desktop. Okay, so you switch back to master. That will undo everything you did for the WAD, and you'll be able to start over right at the beginning. So it's very helpful that way. All right. Hope you enjoyed this. See you soon.